Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to our Library 2.0 mini conference, Virtual Reality and Learning Leading the Way. We are sure grateful to have you here today. All of our panelists are here. Tammy Westergard and Sara Jones, our coordinating organizers, are here. Special thanks to San Jose State University School of Information, the original and ongoing partner sponsors of this conference series for 12 years now. I'm now going to turn some time over to Dr. Sandra Hirsch, the Associate Dean of Academics, the College of Professional and Global Education at San Jose State, who will be followed by Dr. Anthony Chow, Director and Professor, School of Information. Sandy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve, and welcome to everyone to this exciting conference. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this Library 2.0 conference that we are going to be focused on today, the theme of virtual reality and learning, leading the way. I'm very excited about the focus and how we'll be discussing how libraries and other organizations are leading the way by using virtual reality, which is one of ALA's 10 top library technology trends to enhance and transform learning in their communities. I want to especially thank our partners, Sara Jones and Tammy Westergard, who helped us put together the conference today. They were really gracious with their time and did a fantastic job. And I know you're going to enjoy what they've put together for us today. And I also just want to say how proud San Jose State School of Information is to sponsor this important discussion. I look forward to hearing more today about the creative and innovative ways that libraries are using virtual reality in their community. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Anthony Chow, who is the Director and Professor of the School of Information at San Jose State University, to welcome you as well.
Thank you so much, Sandy. First of all, I just want to say how exciting it is to see the diversity of people in really the geographical representation from really all across the globe. But anyway, greetings everyone. I am Dr. Anthony Chow, Director of the SJSU iSchool. We are honored to both sponsor and host this amazing global event. Following in Sandy's footsteps, special thanks to Steve, Sandy as well, Sara and Tammy for their amazing work on this program. Also special thanks to all of the outstanding presenters who have gathered here today to share their expertise with us. The SJSU iSchool is the largest MLS granting program in the United States, if not the world, and we are committed to high tech, high touch, and high quality. We're proud to be Silicon Valley School of Information, and we hope all of you will enjoy today's conference as a small part of our commitment and service to the field. The traditional saying is a picture is worth 1,000 words. I would say a VR experience is more like 1,000,000 words or more. Thank you for joining us today. And now let me turn it over to two of my new best friends and colleagues, Sara and Tammy. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. We're just so thrilled to be part of this. The breadth and depth of the things you're going to hear about today are going to be absolutely amazing. And one of the things, first of all, I want to thank Anthony, Sandy, and Steve, and my cohort Tammy, who you're going to hear more from. She's going to wrap our whole conference up today, so we're very excited about that. I did want to take a moment that's a bit of a bit more somber, and that is for all of us to give our thoughts to Ukraine and the issues and crisis there, a fight for democracy that is important to all of us. Libraries are so fundamental to democracies, and we know there's so much at stake. So I just wanted to make that notation that Ukraine, we are thinking of you, we are supporting you, we are hoping for the best outcome possible. So we have an absolutely amazing group of people all throughout this afternoon, but particularly we're starting off with this keynote presentation with a number of really wonderful folks. You did have biographies that are accessible. So I'm going to just briefly go over our panelists, and each one of them have something very special to bring. But if you look at the rest of the conference, many of these folks, you will see a deeper dive into some of their conversations that follow this keynote. So First of all, I'll say just a teeny bit about myself. I am the Washington State Librarian, and I've been in this position for a little bit more than a year. I was in California before, and that's where I got some great exposure to my fellow state librarian, Greg Lucas, who was very fundamental in getting VR going. One of the things that I was really proud and interested in coming to the state of Washington is we also have done some amazing virtual reality work. So I'm following in the footsteps of our former state librarian, who is a UW college professor now, Cindy Aiden, and we've done some really breakthrough things here too. As mentioned, Greg Lucas is the state librarian of California, and he is also a San Jose State University graduate. So I imagine of proud alumni. And Greg and I got to know each other a number of years ago. I think it might have been a little bit more than 6 when I just said in a meeting, I'd was looking for some support to do this VR thing. And he said, I think I can help. And we started out with a pretty nominal amount of money, but really got this going, and it's come amazingly far in that amount of time. I also, in our panelists, want to introduce a good friend that's been in this journey with Tammy and I for a number of years, and that is Milton Chen. So Milton came to us, actually we came to him, I think we stalked him at an IMLS conference because he was really leading this country in terms of thinking about how we might rethink education, especially in his role of Edutopia, and his book, Education Nation, 6 Leading Edges of Innovation in Our Schools. You know, just really looking at education is so critically important, and all these things, whatever they might be, VR or others, are tools to get the best outcomes. So you'll be hearing more from Milton about that. I also met virtually Devine from Microsoft, who is the Director of Business Strategy, Libraries and Museums. And we met virtually, and we were going to do this conference in person a number of years ago, and we didn't make that happen. But now I'm a colleague of hers in the state of Washington, and we did get to meet in person on Microsoft campus. And you're going to be hearing some wonderful things about Catherine, really the metaverse and this whole future that we'll be looking at. And she will have a session later too. And then some of my more recent colleagues, Karsten Heise, who's the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And he's going to tell you briefly about the program, a really exciting program going on in the state of Nevada, along with Dana Ryan, who has a doctorate in educational leadership from UNR and is really central into WIOA. And then we bring that to our other panelist and co-conspirator, my good friend Tammy Westergard, who is the former Nevada State Librarian. And it is our thinking, and I think we're absolutely right about this, is that Tammy now works in the Governor's Office of Economic Development for the state of Nevada, and we believe she might be the only working librarian with that kind of positioning libraries so importantly in how we recover from the pandemic, but even more importantly, how we decide how this economy is going to work and work well for everyone. So we're really, really excited about this panel and this presentation. Really, one of the things that we wanted to focus on as we were talking, and then we got other panelists to come and speak, is how is it that we support teachers and students and adults with distance learning, which we know became critically important, digital literacy, and to ensure that everyone who wants to acquire these skills, these very marketable skills, can do that. That it isn't just only a privilege or the ability of some and not all. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off with Milton Chen, and he's going to give us his perspective about how virtual reality and learning might address the edges that are so important to education. So off to you, Milton.
Thanks, Sarah, so much, and just a pleasure to be part of this gathering. I'm an enthusiast for libraries. I'm an enthusiast for powerful learning, and just so pleased to be part of this conversation, which is really coming at the dawn of a new age of educational media. I started my career at Sesame Street, and I thought I'd reflect back to you. This does remind me about the dawn of educational television. Because at that time, you can go back about 50 years, Sesame Street turned 50 about 3 years ago now. There was this hope that educational television could achieve some great new goals for schools and for preschoolers, but it was controversial. And I'm sure you may encounter this in your work with VR. People say, well, what is that? And how is that possibly going to help with issues of racial equity, of workforce development, of things that we're so concerned about as a democracy? But I do believe that that you're at the dawn of something very important and something very critical to the future of our democracy. Not to put too fine a point about it, but be prepared for some pushback. I know that when Sesame Street started, there was a lot of conversation about whether preschoolers could actually learn. They're supposed to go to school to learn, and they're too young to learn. And learning through television, have you seen television in 1968? I mean, it's terrible. This will never work. But this was something entirely different from what we had seen before. And you'll be hearing and learning about lots of things that we have not seen before. So I think that's very exciting. To the point of back in 1969, when Sesame started, it was actually banned in Mississippi. It was thought to be dangerous. It was thought to be dangerous to have people of different races working together, learning from each other, Spanish being spoken for the first time. So there are many, I think, connections to virtual reality and what is possible. I understand there are a few thousand people registered for this conference, and I believe 50 years ago when educational television was starting, that PBS was just starting in 1970, there was about a few thousand people working at PBS stations around the country. I started working at the KQED here in San Francisco in 1987. So you have a chance now to grasp a new vision and to provide the leadership, leading the way, as this conference title suggests. I'm also very keen on the role of public libraries. A lot of talk about democracy, as Sara mentioned, a lot of talk about our infrastructure. What about our civic infrastructure? What about the places where we gather together across lines of race and class and learn from each other? Public libraries have such an important role to play in that. So I'm just so impressed by the way in which libraries have pivoted during the pandemic to offer online services, helping schools and teachers come up with curricula, providing services to immigrant families. Librarians are reading to children in different languages. You all know much more about that than I do, but libraries, again, have demonstrated during this pandemic what an important role they have to play. I'm going to share some slides, just a few. You can see my screen. I'm going to talk about the 6 edges of innovation and learning very quickly. How's that? Yeah, and if you want to get a hold of me for, can you see me all right? Yeah. That's my email, miltonchensf@gmail.com. 6 edges of innovation and learning. I covered many of these in a book I wrote more than a decade ago. I think they're still relevant. But I always like to start a conversation about learning by talking about the whole child, the whole learner, and the ways in which we are all smart. Not just the verbal, not just the logical and mathematical, but the 6 other ways. The visual learner, the musical learner. These are Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, 8 multiple intelligences, different ways in which we're all smart and have different learning strengths. Those who like to move their bodies and are more kinesthetic, athletes, dancers. And again, VR suggests some ways in which the bodily or kinesthetic intelligence can be part of it. The intrapersonal intelligence, knowing yourself well, your feelings, your emotions, your aspirations. The interpersonal, those who like to work with others. And again, VR suggests ways in which learners can work together in different VR environments. And that naturalist intelligence, people who are good with plants and animals and love to be in nature. Those who are biophiliacs, I guess is the term that E.O. Wilson came up with, love of nature, biophilia. So we can think about the ways in which learners come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and intelligences, and ways in which VR can support that. I also like to talk about the learning ecosystem and the where people can learn as they move through their lives, starting with young people into adulthood, not just in schools, not just in colleges, and not just in libraries, but other places. The home is a very powerful learning environment. Museums, national parks. I've been part of an effort to to use national parks as outdoor classrooms. Churches and businesses, we learn from our colleagues, our colleagues who are working with us in different projects and different businesses. So think about a larger ecosystem, and libraries play, again, a very critical role in this. And I'll describe 6 edges of innovation that I like to talk about. They have been on the edges of learning. They've been on the edges of school systems, the edges of universities for the past couple of decades, but now they're beginning to move towards the center. And again, virtual reality and libraries have an important role to play in bringing these edges together. I'll start with the first edge on the upper left, the thinking edge. This is probably the most important edge, because if we can change our thinking, then everything else follows. But changing our thinking about what learning is, how it occurs, when, where, and how, and with whom, this is something that's the most difficult thing to do, because we all remember schools. As librarians, you all remember libraries and probably think fondly of libraries. I know I did. I grew up on the south side of Chicago and have fond memories of being in a library branch in Chicago and standing there as a 7-year-old boy with my little library card, standing in a line of adults with a stack of library books and saying, wow, I can do what adults can do. There's no special line for little kids over here. We're all doing the same thing. We're all learners. But that library from more than 60 years ago, hopefully is involved with all sorts of new ways of teaching and learning. So we can learn a lot more. That's the whole point I'd like to make about the thinking edge. Students, learners can learn a lot more quickly than we think they can, and earlier. This is the great lesson of Sesame Street, that 3-year-olds could learn what was formerly thought about as the 5-year-old kindergarten curriculum. In fact, by Sesame Street's audience of preschoolers learning its curriculum at the ages of 3 and 4, the kindergarten curriculum had to adapt to the fact that they'd already learned to count from 1 to 10. They're now teaching counting 1 to 100 now in some kindergartens. Going to that curriculum assessment edge, moving from a textbook and a test-based curriculum and assessment to more project-based and choice-based learning. This is the great advantage that libraries have, is that you offer choice to your patrons coming through, to the learners coming through. They have a choice about what to learn. And that's a tremendous advantage that schools do not necessarily have. The technology edge there on the bottom, of course. I'm glad to see that one of the benefits, the silver linings of the pandemic has been many more devices in the hands of learners, much more access to broadband, even more access to broadband coming with President Biden's infrastructure. I think it's reality. So that's, again, a timely asset as we move forward in thinking about who has access to virtual reality. That time and place edge in the lower right, very important, because we now know we can learn anytime, and we can now learn any place. If you think about that learning ecosystem, the variety of places where we can learn, this then leads us to think about not just learning anytime or any place, but how about any pace? How about changing notions of time and compressing time and learning things more quickly? I know that libraries played a very important role in summer learning during the pandemic. One of my favorite examples is a project out of the New York City Public Library, where they have an archive of historic photographs of New York City. And students are asked to find a building in that archive that's in their neighborhood, in their community, and then go to that spot and take a photograph of that place, that building, if it's still there, as it stands today. And immediately putting young people in the spot of historians, neighborhood historians, and having to think about issues of historic preservation. Who would have thought that 10-year-olds can be involved in historic preservation, but they can be. That co-teaching and co-learning edge, again, challenging the notions of who is a teacher, who is a learner. I maintain that we can all be teachers and we can all be learners. We should all be teachers and we should all be learners. Hopefully, as a group of librarians, you are also learning while you're also providing services. I love the idea of peer teaching, of cross-age teaching at edutopia.org, the website of the George Lucas Educational Foundation. One of my favorite projects where you see middle school students helping first graders learn to read. You see high school students helping middle school students. So the idea of teaching across generations, teaching across ages, again, this is what you're doing in libraries by welcoming all people of all ages. Senior citizens can be involved with virtual reality programs. I look forward to hearing more about that, but more intergenerational learning afforded by VR. And my last edge is the youth edge, of course. When youth are empowered, they can become tremendous change agents for learning, for their own learning and the learning of others. I like to say they're carrying this change in their pockets now through these small little devices. And it's a new approach to pocket change. I'll just close there and say that I'm so pleased that you're having this conference and really thinking as a group of leaders about this new age of learning made possible by VR. Just as there were a few thousand pioneers thinking about educational television 50 years ago, you have an opportunity to go beyond what educational television was able to provide and offer a whole new way of learning through VR. So thank you very much.
Milton, thank you so much. That was just a wonderful foundation for us, and really making us think how technology does change, but how the need to learn and to grow and to get the skills that we need and the support that we need, and your whole, I love that that's a hive. I assume that that's very intentional, because we are all part of that, all part of growing and engaging young people and learners of all ages. So we definitely love that was your foundation. And so now I want to turn over to Greg Lucas, who, as I mentioned, he and I worked together in the state of California when I was in Marin, and as I said, had a conversation in a much larger meeting and said, hey, what about this VR thing? And a number of years later, much has happened. So off to you, Greg, to tell us a little bit about what's going on in California, your thinking about the roles that libraries are playing in this real challenging time with making sure that education is available to all.
Well, thanks, Sarah. I mean, largely what's going on in California libraries relating to VR is thanks to you. I mean, you made a reference to it earlier, but I've forgotten what the thing was, but we had a conversation, and I don't know, it was like 35 grand or something. And so it was easy to say yes, and I was intrigued by the idea. And I'm so glad that we began on that path, and then ultimately with John McLeod and his team, and then Oculus was a great partner in that effort. We ended up putting 200 VR stations in, 200 VR stations in 200 of California's 1,130 libraries. And you referenced earlier, Sarah, the work that Washington did. Washington was a little more intentional in how they put VR into their libraries. And I mean, I'm a big, one of my favorite things about libraries is they are unique in terms of government or public institutions in their nimbleness and ability to respond to what individual community needs are. And so I'm sort of, well, fanatical is too strong a word, but I like to give local libraries as much flexibility to respond to their community as possible. And so we kind of sent out 200 of these VR stations and said, go for it, right? I mean, it wasn't like it just showed up in a box. I mean, there was follow-up and stuff. But I mean, the thing I learned anyway from that experience is, and we've done a better job since then at the state library, is understanding the capacity. I mean, not everyone has the staffing or the budget to do everything that is being asked of them. I mean, that's true of, I suppose, of any government institution, but it's been a terrific experience in a lot of libraries, and we get a lot of feedback. I remember the mayor of Coalinga, if any of you are familiar with California, I mean, the mayor said we would never in our city, right, the demographics of our city, we would never have this available, right, to the extent that the state library, have made it available right through the library, right? And I think as this conference continues talking, I think we at the state library need to revisit what we're doing with VR. It's like you said, Sarah, it's been 5 or 6 years and so much has changed. And I do know that and Tammy, when you and I were trying to put together a proposal for LSTA, I mean, one of the things that's come home to me is that, and Milton, you were talking about this earlier, right, is that virtual reality, augmented reality, gamification, is that the word? It's something like that. But that they're some of the fastest growing online platforms for learning. And while online learning has been around since 1969, I mean, now you see these new platforms and new ways of learning that libraries may not be at the center of, but are certainly significant players, like in the honeycomb graphic we were looking at before. And I think the way we approach things at the state library is to help beta test new ideas in libraries that they may not have either the capacity or the budget to do on their own, and also to increase access to opportunity. And I was thinking the other day, this is super lame, but I was in a library, a local library, and I was reminded of like going to school, and this is like back when the earth cooled and dinosaurs roamed the earth, but like all of the teachers had like a 2-shelf bookcase that had like the most diverse grouping of titles that you could possibly imagine, right? In the hope that there would be something on those 2 shelves, right, that a kid would find and that would turn them on to learning. And like I say, this is kind of lame, but like I was in this library thinking, and that's what libraries are. They're like this giant kind of right thing that offers these extraordinary opportunities to turn people on to learning and get them excited about something. And I don't know, it makes I used to be a newspaper man, right? Like a cynical newspaper man who covered government, right? And then if that doesn't make you cynical, I don't know what would. But it's so delightful, and so I've never felt more positive about the future because of what I see happening in libraries all over the state. I mean, the creative ideas come from the libraries, right? They don't come from us. Like we get to help, share them with others or make them available more broadly. And it's as you were saying, Milton, it's so neat is kind of like an old person grandma word, but it's so neat to be here at the beginning of this new way of learning and processing information. And I'll end by saying, and I've forgotten where I saw this, but there's some statistic that says like, okay, so you're a kid and you enter kindergarten. By the time you get out of high school or you finish your schooling, 2/3 of those kids go into a job or a vocation that didn't exist when they began school in kindergarten. And you look at these charts, you see the rate of technological advancement, right? The line goes straight up now. These phones, right? Star Trek, it's set 300 years in the future. They had 2 things, right? They had a communicator and then they had a tricorder. We got them both in one phone already. So the one thing though, with all this change, the one thing that is completely constant is, totally, live long and prosper, Tammy. But the one thing that doesn't change, right, is that we're dependent upon information to succeed. The thing about that changes though is there's more and more and more that's accessible. So what's value now in a world of infinite information? It's being able to find the needle that you're looking for in the information haystack. And so, I'm sure you guys have all been to these events where people say, oh, are people still going to the library? And it's like, well, clearly you're not. But I mean, the value, if anything, right? The value of libraries and librarians and the ability to aggregate information and help people find what they're looking for, more valuable now than it's ever been before, and it's only going to be more valuable in the future. All right, I'm getting off the soapbox now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg. It's really been such a pleasure working with you. And I know one of the things you say, and I know we all believe, is that libraries really are flexible and nimble, and we're more, why not, instead of trying to figure out why we shouldn't do something. And you're really typify that, and I've loved being able to work with you and seeing libraries really develop. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to really do some future focusing and looking, because there is just as Greg was mentioning, it's pretty unimaginable what's in our future. And so we asked Devine of Microsoft, and she does have another session later on, but she's going to talk to us a little bit about this thing that people, and some specific people, but it's really for all, the metaverse and extended reality and virtual reality and what that might maybe look like. So off to you, Catherine.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. And thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk to you all today. I'm not an educator, I'll just be clear on that. However, I do look after libraries and museums at Microsoft, and I do come out of museums. I sort of consider myself a technologist. I've got 40 years in technology. I was a preschooler watching Sesame Street in 1968, Milton, but so it did something, right? And, but I spent a decade at the American Museum of Natural History as their chief digital officer. So looking at digital, so I brought that museum. So I want to talk a little bit, to look at the future, we have to look at the past. And I think, everyone sort of looks at the world as being constant, as though it doesn't change, and wanting to hold on to what they know and are familiar. But if you look back at any point in history, everything has changed constantly. It's not a new phenomenon. However, I think the pace of change is now faster. So you're now seeing more and more change in one generation. So if I look at my own career, I left school in 1981. I went to university. There were no computers. I grew up in Australia. There were no computers in Australia. So my whole university, no computers. I studied as an accountant. Computers came in 1985, and that was revolutionary to actually have a PC, but it was completely outside the range of any kind of a consumer product. It was purely a business product. And in the course of my sort of 40 years at this point, we've seen computers, we've seen the internet, another huge revolution. We've seen mobile, right? We've seen the start of VR. And let me tell you that VR is just the start of where we're going. And so everyone who's telling you that, do you really want to try VR? Is it new, et cetera? It's really just early in something that we will all take for granted 10 years from now. So I like to talk to libraries and museums a lot about thinking about 2030. It's not that it's not here now, it is, but it's not about where we are today, but where we will be in 2030. And this is a number of progressions. So one of the limitations of technology, one of the things that have caused technology to evolve is about addressing limitations. So there's always a limitation. It's compute power, it's memory, it's something like that. So back in my early days on computers, I remember playing, it was probably Pac-Man or something like that, and it had a clock speed of 4 kilohertz. And then the next computer came out and it was a clock speed of, which is compute power, of 8 kilohertz, which is like nothing today, right? And I couldn't play the game anymore because the game just went like this, because it could compute so much faster. And everything has been about addressing those kinds of things. So if we look at VR starts to bring you into an immersive world, but the very first VR, and maybe still some today, are just movies, right? But you're going to get that much more emotional, and again, I'm not an educator, emotional connection from something that you're more immersed in than something that you're not. And so it's yet another channel. But then there are challenges. The compute speed isn't fast enough. So people say, oh, it's nauseous. And everyone's always talking about the limitations in the technology and what is bad with it. Yes, you do get nauseous because the frame rate isn't fast enough, but the frame rate will get addressed as compute power gets addressed. And then it's an isolated experience. That's the next one. Well, now we're getting into a collaborative experience. So it's like, I can see you, you can see me. It's starting to feel more like the real world. So then let's just fast forward to looking at this as a step in a progression, and we get to 2030, and things that we take for granted now, what we are doing today with phones will look really, really old-fashioned. And if that sounds like controversial, just think about the fact that it hasn't been that long that we've had phones, and they were controversial when they started as well. As were PCs were controversial, as was the telephone, as was electricity, as was probably printing back 500 years ago as well. It's just constant. So then we get into a completely different way about how we interact in the world. So constraints. The constraints we're addressing is time and place. So right now, for us to have an authentic experience, what we would consider, we have to be in the same physical location. But clearly that raises issues of equity and access, as well as, so not everybody can come to the library, not everybody can come to a museum, and not everyone can go to a school. I grew up in Australia, and at least in the time, there was a school over the air, like they did education for a very remote area. So not everyone can physically go to a school building. This reduces that constraint and brings you into removing that idea of needing to be in the same place to have the same authentic experience. So don't look at some of the manifestations you see of the metaverse in 2022, because there are compute limitations that mean that's why everything looks like an avatar. That's why everyone will tell you that it looks like Second Life, for those of you who remember Second Life. The reason it's an avatar, and also I joke, the reason that all the avatars are cut off at the waist is because it takes a lot of compute power. Yes, Second Life is still there. I saw something in the comments. Is because it takes a lot of compute power to generate that. But that compute power will be addressed, as it always has. I'm sure you've heard about Moore's law and how it's always just like getting better and better and better with time, exponentially better with time. And then you get to the idea that you can actually have a full holographic image that is interacting in the same way with as many senses as possible, but taking some of those constraints about place out. And then suddenly the idea of having to get together in real life, which we can't deliver on today, suddenly seems like, why were we ever worried? And I just want to sort of suggest that what your experience with phones now, smartphones is pervasive. Every single one of us has one of it right next to us, probably, hopefully, maybe not. 86% of the community has a smartphone. It's almost impossible. I heard Sara talk about how she was worried about she lost hers when she was down in Portland. And, that's the world that we're going to see. It's going to be the idea of immersive anywhere, anytime, where, someone, my family in Australia and I here in Seattle can go visit the Louvre in France without us having to go on an airplane and have the same sort of experience. That's the Holy Grail. That's where we're heading. And I think it's worthwhile as we think about this to imagine that that's where it is going, not where it is today. There are always limitations about where we are today. I'll pause there because I've probably gone on too long, but I've got a session, I think, in an hour from now, which I'll go into much more detail. But my sort of, the thing that I want you to take away is technology is always evolving, and it's for a purpose. It's never about technology for the sake of technology. It's about enabling you to do something you can't do today and do it more effectively. In this case, learning, education, etc. I'll pause there. Thanks so much, Sara, for the opportunity. You're on mute.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was wonderful. And I know people will be looking forward to a deeper dive. One of the things that I think is you know, it's so interesting about this is San Jose actually hosted a meeting in virtual reality for us, and some of us were in this kind of dimension, and some were in the actual goggles, so the third dimension. And it was by far the best meeting I've been to in months and months and months, because it just is going to enhance our world so differently when the experience can be you know, next to each other and shared. And so there's so much opportunity. So now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about some very real world happenings of things that have been going on in the state of Nevada with leadership from Tammy and Karsten and Dana. They have an amazing project that they're going to talk to you about that is actually in progress right now, making these virtual reality tools available to folks to increase their chances of getting well-paying jobs, to learn in that 3D environment, which is, you know, it's pretty interesting because in a lot of ways, it's really just parallel when you went to school and you got a lab and you got to do the real in the lab. Well, virtual reality really makes that possible for people in all kinds of different places to get that real experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Karsten, and he's going to talk about this human work in this age of smart machines, which every single person that you've heard from so far has been kind of talking about these smart machines, but they're all smart because of us. So off to you, Karsten.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, they are smart of us, but not quite. So yes, let me start a little bit talking and about smart machines, you know, new forms of intelligence, bring a little bit back to what you know, Greg was talking about, Milton was talking about, and then tied into this grant that we got in the midst of the pandemic. The project is called SANDY, which stands for Supporting Advancing Nevada's Dislocated Individuals. And while we received the funding during from the U.S. Department of Education during the pandemic, the core structure of it really had actually been designed prior to the pandemic, and as a response to the challenges of the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on workforce education and training. So that was really at the core of it. Then the pandemic came along. U.S. Department of Education asked for you know, novel approaches, utilizing forms of distance learning and other novel approaches, which we thought, well, we can incorporate the library. Well, that was novel to them, not so novel to us, but Dana will talk about this in a minute. So fourth industrial revolution response, that was sort of at the core of how we designed it. And well, you need to define what the fourth industrial revolution actually means. A lot of people talking about it. We adopt the definition of the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. And quote, a couple of years ago, he stated that a fundamental shift in how we produce, consume, relate to one another, driven by the convergence of the physical world, the digital world, and human beings. So that's his definition. And from that definition, you can really see that convergence and relation of the physical, digital, human worlds are key characteristics here. So how can we analyze the condition of the humans in the age of the small machines, of smart machines? They are very small too, but of small machines. And AI was mentioned in the chat early on, and that's sort of what we really define as smart machines. So the short answer really is that this fourth industrial revolution era will be characterized by the coexistence between humans and smart machines. So it's not the replacement. It will be the coexistence. So these smart machines are then, you know, look at them as increasingly run by artificial intelligence technologies. So to really understand, you know, that relationship between human and the smart machine, don't regard it as this is a point problem, but you need to understand it in much broader and actually philosophical framing. And I'm trying to talk a little bit about that as well in a minute. So virtual reality was mentioned. We will talk a lot about virtual reality later in the individual sessions. But virtual reality, so the notion of reality, what is this? It's a crucial concept, obviously, when you deal with how workers are operating with smart machines. And our concept of reality, it's actually still governed by the Enlightenment. and the age of the Enlightenment. But it's now slowly eroding and has been eroding over time. So if you want to turn sort of philosophical, and there's a book recently been published, Dan Huttenlocher, Eric Schmidt, and Henry Kissinger on the future of AI, they are really stressing that the characteristics of the Enlightenment, how this needs to be contrasted with our current conditions and the future of AI. So during the Enlightenment, Kant stipulated that the human mind really relies on conceptual thinking and lived experiences. And Milton was just talking about this as well. And the mind could achieve sort of the inner essence of things through the quest that sort of took to or has taken to forms. So we are observing ever more precise observations of the reality that we are seeing. We are ever more extensively cataloging knowledge. And that knowledge that's being created and cataloged is then being used for innovation. That then is basically innovation in that sense can be understood as the extension of catalog knowledge. Little caveat in this, the early part of the 20th century, reality was already becoming at least, or it became at least increasingly apparent that, that full reality might not be, or reality might not be fully revealed. You can look at Einstein merging space and time. You can look at Heisenberg and Schrödinger, highlighting the importance of the observer and the existence, or the existence through interaction. Schrödinger's cat, for example, in this sense, and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. But nevertheless, as Kant predicted, humans continue to interpret the world according to the structure of their own minds. Now, if you then now enter the increasing digitization of the fourth industrial revolution, it will slowly become apparent that humans are approaching the limits of their cognitive capacity. And are increasingly utilizing smart machines. So, and potentially competing, knowing full well with the cognitive capacity constraint that you will never be able to outcompete those machines. So slowly, humans are beginning to yield the monopoly of being the discoverer, the contextualizer, the cataloger of the world's phenomena. And then in addition, I was alluding to this in my remark on innovation, we are approaching sort of a tipping point, sort of phase transition in complex systems where, innovation might no longer be the extension of prior knowledge. So the digital world has really rendered human thought both less contextual and less conceptual. But as it was mentioned, information still needs to, ever more increasing number of information we are being exposed to still needs to be in context dependent. It needs to be contextualized in order to be turned into knowledge. But now with the introduction of AI and smart learning machines, not just machines that are smarter from the get-go, no, they're actually learning. The role which minds have traditionally played in shaping, ordering, assessing, choices and actions are being altered, and that means that the Enlightenment's proposition that reason is the most important element is actually being fundamentally challenged. So we are moving into a sort of post-Enlightenment area. Similarly to, as Kissinger, Schmidt, and Huttenlocher pointed out, the transition occurred between the area of faith to the area of enlightenment. No, we are moving from the area of enlightenment to the era of post-enlightenment. So we are not only talking, when we are talking about smart machines, it's not working machines that are mechanical supporting or computer systems that increase human productivity, but we are talking about working with smart machines with a new kind of intelligence. And while these machines are still very imprecise and require a lot of reflection interpretation by humans of their output and their recommendations, those machines are learning and doing things. And above all, what you need to put into perspective is that they are learning these things in a black box, which is incomprehensible to humans. You have basically an objective function, and then the machine is executing and learning why it's doing it. Now, it's sort of the counter argument to think outside the box. It's going back into the box and thinking, and you do not know how the thinking actually is occurring. So in this sort of hybrid world of human-machine interaction, that's probably the most, or one of the greatest challenges humanity has ever faced. And Milton was alluding to this. When we talk about intelligence, different forms of intelligence, so human intelligence, machine intelligence now, we should actually, like Milton was alluding to, actually talk about intelligence in general. So then this general intelligence can split into different categories. So for example, intelligence that's good for scientific discovery, intelligence that's good for, at emotions, intelligence that's good at creativity. So very similar to what Milton was describing. So still very relevant, today and in the future. So what does this really mean for the future of work? Well, Eric Schmidt is sort of putting out the idea that humans with, AI will lead to the increasing use of assistance for the humans. So that humans will then, be able to develop, higher order skills by working with those AI assistants. But this still means that humans will still utilize human judgment, but with a much deeper knowledge base, thanks to those machines. And that in turn means that humans would require new literacies to work with those machines. And that means also that education would need to be reinvented. So reinvention, but then I also would like to look at the past a little bit. And I saw a couple of participants here from Germany and Austria. So you will probably recall the good old concept that was developed in the 18th and 19th century by late 18th and early 19th century by Wilhelm von Humboldt. And the Germans call this Bildung. And it's very hard to translate, but you probably could translate into self-cultivation. And within Confucian thought, you have a similar approach. And also to remind ourselves where the word education actually comes from. So two Latin phrases. One is educare, to mold, and the other one is educere, to lead out, and that's implying a much broader context. So in this sense, Bildung, self-cultivation stipulates that education is going way beyond the mere professional skills. So, and that also requires human agency. So looking at these newly required skills, I found really useful the concept that Professor Joseph Aoun from Northeastern University put forward. And he's talking about 3 interacting literacies, which he calls humanics, consisting of data literacy, technology literacies, as well as human literacy. And then the human literacy, there's critical thinking, system thinking, entrepreneurship, and cultural aptitudes. And very similarly, Eric Brynjolfsson, he calls for new skills with a focus on creativity, interpersonal skills, and teamwork skills, and large-scale problem defining and solving skills. And he's also arguing for a boost to entrepreneurship. So that's sort of the more philosophical part, and I'm trying to bring it back to the project Sandy before handing it off to Dana. Let me just at a very high level talk about the concepts of Sandy, the components that relate to what I was just talking about. And the relationship really manifests itself through the components of Sandy. So there's a technology platform at its core, which is the Career Navigator, and that requires human agency. I was just talking about the user agency. It emphasizes the human and contextualization by providing human assistance, in conjunction with this Career Navigator technology platform via human career navigators. So the human very much helping contextualizing. It has libraries at the core, and Tammy will talk about in our closing address about the community of practice. It also has an entrepreneurial component, and then a skills decoder component, where the skills are decoded, but also linked to testing, aptitude testing, career readiness testing, computational assessment testing. And then there will be virtual reality tools providing career information, which industries in Nevada are growing, which are the resulting high demand occupations, what are the skills portfolios that those require. And then there will be VR powered, what we call VR powered career on-ramps for qualifications that are needing to recognize credentials and are developed in conjunction with local community colleges. And they are developed with humans, with experts, textbook publishers, industry representatives, employers, equipment manufacturers, and we call these group guarantors. And this approach, again, is contextualizing this community approach. So really, the VR we are utilizing is the second teacher that Tammy often, uses that acronym. So that's sort of limiting my remarks here, but really handing over to Dana. So could you please share with us a little bit more the details of Sandy and help us sort of see how sort of libraries in Nevada can support teachers, students, and adults, and to ensure that everybody can have the marketable skills in this world of automation that I was just talking about.
I would be delighted to do that.
And Dana, if I could just say, we do need to wrap up in the 5. Thank you.
I'll be quick.
Thank you.
So I'm Dana Ryan. I serve as the special assistant to the president at Truckee Meadows Community College here in Reno, Nevada. It was also part of the team that developed Project Sandy and is working to implement it across the state. What I think is the key to take away about Sandy is that it is an effort to create an integrated system that's easily accessible for job seekers so that they can get the help they need to get a job that pays a family sustaining wage. But at the center of all of that is the public library. So I am thrilled to be here and I will be real quick. So in Nevada, libraries have long played kind of a central role in the workforce ecosystem. And you can see that in things like the awards that we've received and being in the list of top libraries in America, Carson City Library, the North Las Vegas Library District recently. Also in things like the Carson City Library being the first in the nation to offer a credentialing opportunity for the manufacturing technician. You could do the class there, you could take the test there and get your certification that led to jobs at places like Tesla, Panasonic, and even ClickBond, a local employer who makes parts for rocket ships. So we've had a long history of doing those things. During COVID, I think there were some really innovative opportunities that came about through the libraries where they took the opportunity to step up and step in. One of those was the North Las Vegas District Library District that decided they were going to take a leading role in helping businesses access CARES resources. They called every single business owner in their area and offered one-to-one support to help them do that, to access those resources. Again, these are really kind of non-traditional activities of a library that show you that they are really central to what we do here around workforce development. The common thread for all of these things, obviously, and for all of the public providers also, is this idea of learning and earning so that we can help all of our Nevada citizens be successful. I also want to just shout out to Karsten, who through the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and also he serves on the State Council of Libraries and Literacy, has actively promoted the role of the libraries in workforce development, because we don't always think about that they are the easily accessible place where no one feels bad about walking in, nobody feels less than, everybody feels comfortable walking into a library. So Karsten's really had a big hand in promoting that throughout our state. So I came out of K-12, I was a teacher trainer, I did all of those things. And one of the things Tammy and I talk a lot about is, look, you got to teach people what they're supposed to do, because we all are here to help, but if we're not on the same team and we don't know what the resources are, we don't know how to do that. So Tammy has really worked hard to pull together a community of practice to teach them about the Project Sandy tools, and that main tool that is the Nevada Career Explorer, as Karsten pointed out, that is going to help us give these folks an opportunity to identify their skills, name them in a way that connects to job opportunities and job descriptions through ONET and through our local and regional service providers, and that is going to help connect them to training opportunities that will get them industry recognized credentials, not necessarily a degree unless they want one, but those industry recognized credentials that will open the door for them. And how are we doing that? We're doing that by utilizing opportunities in technology like virtual reality, this platform called the Nevada Career Explorer, and using a library card as the access, the entry ticket, if you will, to get to those things that will help improve people's lives. So I do want to just say quickly, this is a huge community of practice. And who does that include? It includes our lead agency that's accountable to the U.S. Department of Education. That's the Governor's Office of Workforce Education, led by the venerable director, Isla Young, who I think is on the call with us today. She's amazing, and we are so proud and happy to work with her. It's also the other state agencies that are part of this, as well as the workforce, Nevada's workforce boards and one-stops, the Nevada System of Higher Education and all of our community colleges, and a huge range of statewide and community partners. These are the community of practice. Very quickly, because I know Sarah's looking at her watch saying, Dana, finish. Here are some of the key things that Nevada Career Explorer does for us that I think are unique to Nevada and also unique to what libraries offer to our state. The Nevada Career Explorer is connected directly to Nevada's key resilient industries that rely on people with science, technology, engineering, and math skills. And it connects them to the opportunities to learn those skills in a way that they can attach to, particularly if they were not necessarily great students or don't see themselves as great students. This is one of the advantages of virtual reality. And in this context, we are developing, we have not developed, but are in the process of developing 5 virtual reality classrooms in that headset that serve as second teachers, particularly for folks who maybe don't see themselves as traditional learners. And we're doing that around certified clinical hemodialysis, certified nursing assistants, refrigerant, HVAC handling, manufacturing technicians, and computational thinking. Each of those leads to an industry recognized credential that can take them anywhere and will open doors to a job. So I know that we're out of time, but I just want to say this is just the beginning for Nevada. We've already done amazing things. We're going to continue to build on what we have, make more opportunities available for virtual reality, and make sure that our citizens are on a path to economic sustainability for their families and for their lives. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. I know we all covered an awful lot here, and I know I watched lots of questions in chat, and I think, you know, it really sums up kind of where Milton started with us. There's probably more questions than answers, but we all need to figure this out, and we can. There's a number of great sessions to follow up with. They'll dive in deeper. I think all of us want to continue to have conversations about this. And Steve, do you want to say any final words about how people go to the next part of this conference?
Thank you so much, everyone. The next sessions are starting. We don't hold them back if the keynote goes long. So I'll encourage people to jump out. Thanks, panelists. Thanks, Tammy and Sara. Look at the email that you received or go to the front page of library20.com to see the session starting now. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. That was a lot.